I'm live. It is Wednesday, the 19th of July, 2023, and I'm reading out of Life as Carola. It's a far memory book by Joan Grant. Joan Grant lived between 1907 and 1989, and Carola lived, well, she was born in 1510, so it was before the Renaissance. And I'm coming towards the end. I'm loving it very much, and I'm interested to see how it goes on, even though I have read it before. We are at chapter 26 now. Carola was the illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin. She was banished from the castle with her mother. Her mother died. She's had quite a few adventures in the last 20 years of her life. And we are here, she is now married to Carlos Ludovici, and we are here at chapter 26. We have been reading about Alcestis, who was Carlos' godson, who was a seafarer. The Crimson Rose. I think Carlos knew that everything in the Perugian house served to remind me of Alcestis, for the day after he had ridden away to join his ship, Carlos took me to the house of the high art. If he guessed that I and his godsons had been lovers, he gave no sign. He was gentle with me, as he had always been. Perhaps if there was any change in his manner, it was that he treated me with an added tenderness, as though I were recovering from an illness. I put away the bright dresses I had worn for Alcestis. Now I chose the sombre colours of a matron, and wore a coif over my hair. I no longer wished to go out alone, but tried to fill my days with the cares of a housewife. I started to embroider new curtains for the principal room, using sad blues and cypress green to suit my mood. I spent long hours in the kitchen with Katerina, learning how to make quince preserve or to dry mushrooms for winter use. Carlos seemed absorbed in translating Greek parchment into Latin. He had a table carried out to the vine arbor by the terrace, where he would sit, poring over the text and then adding to the meticulous brown letters that barred the page, line after line. Sometimes he would have his food taken out there instead of coming in to join me, and even when he thanked me for sharpening a fresh quill for him, his thoughts seemed far away. Though I seldom saw Alcestis in my dreams, there were times when I knew I had seen him, yet could not remember where. Had he reached those islands of eternal summer, where he had once thought to be together with me? Had he proved the Spanish sailors right, or so would return to Italy out over the east? I would wake warm from his arms, open my eyes thinking to find my head pillowed on his shoulder, and weep for loneliness of him. Sometimes I knew that he was in danger, and for many nights I could get no news of his safety, in spite of my fervent prayers. We had little contact with the outside world, but after we had been there a few weeks, I knew that Carlos was seriously disturbed. I questioned him, but he only told me that in Perugia there was trouble which might delay our return to the city. I thought there must have been a riot among the townspeople, and that Carlos tried to conceal it from me because he feared it would remind me of the sorrow over Padua. Only when he had to explain why he must pass the winter in the hills did I learn that a kinsman of the Griffin had slain an envoy of His Holiness, and in revenge the Papal States had sent their mercenaries against the town. The banner of the Griffin had been torn from the towers, and with it fell the power of the house which had ruled Perugia for so long, the house whose tributary blood ran in my veins. Days followed days in endless pattern, storing the sombre months into a year. Twice Carlos received news of Alcestis, and I learned that he still listened to Pietro's counsel, and that none of my prayers that he should see the evil in the crippled sailor had been answered. Then in a dream again I saw Alcestis. I was with him on the Crimson Rose. Many of the crew were ill, and there were few to man the yards. Although there was still a sufficiency of hard bread, some of the soldiers were near starvation, for the teeth had fallen from their oozing gums, and they would could not chew it. They scraped the biscuit with their knives until it made a little pile of powder in the palm of their hand. Then they tried to lick it up with their swollen tongues. Some of them soaked the biscuits in their water rations, but they soon found this increased their thirst unbearably. For each man had only a quarter pannikin, served out at night and morning from the stinking residue in the half-empty cask. The waves had risen after weeks of oily calm. A sail was stretched on the poop to catch the rain, but only a little fresh water had been collected before the first seas broke over the deck. The wind seemed to leap at the ship like a flight of demons. It tore the heavy canvas from the numbed fingers of the men on the main yard. One of them hurtled down to lie sprawled on the deck like a rag doll discarded by an angry child. The waves could not wash him overboard, for his leg was jammed against the hatch, but they sluiced away the blood which trickled from the corner of his mouth until it ran no longer. The ship was driving forward under bare span, tatters of canvas cracking in the wind. They had lashed the rudder from the lower deck, for 2 helmsmen had been carried away by the sea. The port lights of the stern cabin had been stove in. The sky globe and the little cask of spirits were rolling to and fro in the dirty water. I heard a crash above the noise of the storm and knew a mast had fallen. I saw Alcestis hacking with an axe at the shrouds which held it to the bulwarks. I thought the ship must turn over and drown everyone aboard her, but she was freed of the mast. She slowly righted herself. The moon shone for a moment through the hurrying clouds. It seemed as if the peak of the storm had passed, but it only waited to gather to itself a greater fury. I saw the spear fall on Alcestis. I heard him scream. I tried to reach him. I woke knowing he was dead, longing for the power to return to him so that our bodies could drift in the same current into the peace below the storm. Then I realized that it was only in my spirit that I had seen his body die, and that, enclosed in Carola, I might live to be very old. I knew that if Carlos saw me, I should betray my bitter knowledge, and I wished to protect him from this grief as long as it were possible. I feigned illness so that I could keep to my room and close fast the shutters against the unheeding sun that shone serenely through my earth was dark. The illness I feigned became a reality. I fell into a low fever. At night I was plagued with an icy sweating, and I coughed until my handkerchief was stained with blood. Through Anna I persuaded Carlos not to come near me, feigning that if he did so the same fever would attack him. When next I saw him, it was difficult to believe that he too had not been very ill. His face looked as though it were moulded in wax, and the skin showed no vitality of blood. Carlos, who for so long withstood the siege of age, had become its prisoner. Wrack. Next chapter. In the autumn of 1536, we returned to Perugia. Even though our house was some distance from the town gate, I could see above the city wall that many of the buildings still showed the blackening of fire. Our servants had travelled with us, and when we came to the house we found the dust of more than 2 years lying undisturbed. I went to my room. The hinges of the shutters were stiff with rust, and they opened grudgingly. The bed carvings were clouded with cobwebs, and as I drew back a hanging, moths fluttered out blindly from the musty velvet. In the little casket where once I had kept my fard pots, I found the scarf I had waved from the window when Alcestis rode away. Out of its folds fell the sprig of verbena he had picked for me. The snow came early that year, and only the pattern of bird feet marked the white lawn under my window. Carlos seldom left his room, for he found the stairs arduous to climb. The flames were greedy for the logs on the white hearth, but even they seemed powerless to warm his chill transparency. I knew that he was drawing near to the close of his years, and I prayed that the news of Alcestis' death should not come to disturb him. It was early in the new year when I was awakened by a knocking on the outer door. It seemed a summons that I had long awaited in fear. I snatched up a tiring robe and ran down the passage to where a little window overlooked the street. The door was hidden from me by a deep embrasure, but in the freshly fallen snow I saw the track I dreaded. the line of single footprints beside the marks, regular as the knots on a scourge where Pietro's wooden leg had pierced the frozen crust. I listened, but no sound came from the servant quarters. I must open the door before anyone hears him knocking. I ran down the stairs and drew back the heavy bolts. I beckoned Pietro to follow me and took him into a little anteroom which opened off the hall. He told me he had come to tell Carlos that Alcestis was dead, watching me narrowly to see how I took the news. He must have thought me callous, for he would not believe me when I told him I knew of it already. He demanded to see Carlos. I told him that my husband was ill, dying, that he could see no one, but Pietro would not believe me. I tried to bribe him to go away, but he had always hated me since I tried to warn Alcestis against him. I pulled off my rings and said I should give him a bag of gold as well if only he would go in peace. I should not have let him see how desperately I wanted to keep him away from Carlos. At last he found a way to make me fear him, and I had no power once he knew I was afraid. I ordered him to go. He laughed at me. I tried by every means to thwart him. Even going on my knees to plead for peace to Carlos was worth more than my pride, even if it must be humble to Pietro. He stood there in front of me, swaying backwards and forwards, his wooden leg bracing against a dour chest. I noticed that now he only wore a ring in his right ear. The left ear knot had rotted away. A half-healed scar scarred his face like a brand. His lips were red and moist in the coarse beard. He mocked me. Perhaps I will take the gold and leave the old man to drool out his last days in complacency. Yet he would reward me well for news of his son's death. I could tell him how I saw Alcestis die, no longer the gallant captain, but just an ordinary man like any of us. His legs were pinned under a fallen spar. The flesh was so pulped they were nearly severed. After the first screams, he was brave enough, I'll say that for him. Some of the other men were for putting him out of his pain. They said they would not let a cur dog die like that. 2 or 3 of them were blubbering like children, but I told them to leave him. They had to take their orders from me now, for Alcestis had always made it plain that I was to be captain when he died. You tried to warn him against Pietro, didn't you, my pretty? You despised Pietro the loud, the brutish sailor. But I had a cleverer tongue than you had with your lover, for all your fine ways. You thought I didn't know what a fine pair of cuckold's horn you had grown on your husband. You think you are cleverer than Pietro. You think I don't know why you're afraid of my seeing Carlos. It isn't Alcestis' death you're afraid of him knowing, but what Alcestis did when he was living. Your fine lover is dead now. He will never come home to you anymore. Even the sea witches didn't want him, or they would have pulled him overboard instead of letting him die with the waves washing over him. He always said he'd die on the deck of his ship. The spar must have heard him and pinned him down to it. I ran to the door and stretched out my arms across it, bearing the way to the tower room. I thought Pietro would never dare to injure me, for he must have known that to do so would be to risk death by the felon irons. He lurched forward and tore me away. From the door I fell. He poised his wooden leg like a pike against my breast. He taunted me. Shall I skewer you to your fine floor, my pretty? I thought he was going to kill me. I lay there waiting to feel the iron-shod leg drive down through my flesh. Then I saw him pick up something from the settle behind him, and felt a blow on my head that sent me spinning into the darkness. I heard Anna's voice as though it came from far away. Her poor hands are grave cold. She must have been lying here for a long time. She must have stumbled in the dark and hit her head on the corner of that chest. I tried to speak. Pietro, where is he? Has he gone? Gone these 2 years. You're safe with Anna. You have a little fall and hurt your head. Carlos. I must go to Carlos. Pietro, the sailor, is with him. There's no one here. You're caught up in a nightmare. No, he was real. I saw him. I will show you his tracks in the snow. I struggled to the door and flung it open. Anna, bewildered yet obedient, supporting me. The footprints I had seen in the dawn were still there, and beside them the fresher mark of Pietro in haste for his life. I would have sent after him, for then I should have delighted to see him torn by the fellow irons, the punishment for common people who assault one of a noble family. But I was too weary even for revenge. Of what use to kill a viper when its fangs have already driven home their venom. Let him go free from the penalty of men, for demons watch to claim him for their own, and hell can stretch pain farther than the rack. I said to Anna, I must go to Carlos. My weary thoughts ran ahead of me along the passage. Please let Carlos understand why I did not tell him of Alcestis. I thought he would die before his sorrow came upon him. I thought they would soon be young together, beyond death. Now he will die in fear because I have lied to him. He used to say he would not be a stranger in heaven because I had shown it to him. Now he will think I lied in all things. I must cover the bruise on my forehead, or he will question me about it. I stood at the top of the narrow stairs that led to his room. What shall I see when I open the door? Will he order me from his sight? Will he send me away and die here alone and afraid? Carlos was lying on his bed, his face against the pillows, white as stone. I knelt beside him. He was so still, I thought him already dead. I held his hand against my cheek, calling his name very softly. He tried to stroke my hair. Alcestis is dead, Carola. I am so old, yet it was he who was first to die. You knew when it happened, didn't you? I saw by your eyes that you knew, but I had not the courage to ask you to put it into words. You were brave to try not to share your sorrow with me. We loved Alcestis. We should have shared the sorrow of his death together, not alone. I shall be with him very soon. I wonder if he is still steering a far ship. Shall I, who hate ships, find a heaven on the sea? My heaven must be with Alcestis till he makes landfall. He seemed to sleep for a little while. Then he spoke to me again, and his voice was stronger than I had heard it for many days. I have not your vision, Carola. I can only see my heaven as it might be on earth. I have lit my age with dreams of a future where I shall see you again. You will still look as though you do now, but there will be no shadow of old sorrows in your eyes. I shall be a poet by whom beauty is born of words, for only a poet could tell you of his love. I shall have seen you in the sky and in the winter trees, heard your voice down the wind and in the long waves that follow a storm. You will be gathering wild flowers in a summer meadow, your hair live to the wind that bows the grass in homage to you. I shall have crossed the hills before dawn. I shall come to your meadow when the sun is rising, and when I see you, I shall know that it has risen. When you see me, you will pause as though startled to see a stranger. I shall come towards you, and you will hold out your hands to meet mine, for you will know me. Then together we shall go to the house I have built for love, and you will find your name upon the lintel, and upon the hearth, and above the windows. His eyes were wide open, as though he saw far beyond the walls that hid away the sky. Only once did he speak as Carlos, a whisper like the breeze through standing corn. When I am dead, do not pray for my soul. Pray that, when we are born again, it is my youth that I shall see you. Oh, I'll finish this here. The next chapter is entitled To Ephetes.